All right, folks, so welcome back. Before we get to the great Andy McCarthy and proceed with the rest of the hour, I do want to talk about something. You might have missed this simply because the networks have been silent on this. And this is huge. This is huge. The CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, I'll have you know, has estimated. It was a report that came out on Wednesday of last week, but as of Friday evening, the networks ignored what I'm about to tell you, and the CBO says that by raising the minimum wage, it would cost the private sector $15 billion. $15 billion, and raise the deficit. First of all, not only have I not heard it from the networks, hey, RNC, my friends at the RNC, and I do love you, how come I'm not hearing this? Now, maybe a press release went out. Maybe I'm not on the list. I don't know. But beyond the RNC, forget the RNC. I give the RNC a pass here. Hey, John Boehner, where were you and the Republicans holding a press conference saying that the CBO says that raising the minimum wage, which has become the centerpiece of the Democrats' platform for November, would cost the private sector $15 billion and raise the deficit? Where are you? I could see the networks. I could see Brian Williams saying, shh. Scott Pelley, even though he's the most trusted news anchor out there, according to the recent survey, saying, shh. And I could see Diane Sawyer saying, shh. And Matt Lauer, and you know the whole deal. But John Boehner and Mitch McConnell and Reince Priebus, where is everybody? This is a devastating report. When they estimated in February that the wage proposal could cost 500,000 jobs, remember that one? CBS was the only network to report that on its evening newscasts. Folks, we have a media blackout, a media bias by omission in this country, which is worse than what they do report in a biased nature. It's what they don't tell you that's the absolute worst. Because you could combat, they say, oh, this Republican said this, and you could, if it's out there, you could argue with your friends who are on the left or make a point, you know what I'm saying? But if you don't tell the people, and then you are at the dinner table and you say, hey, did you hear what the CBO said about unemployment, raising the minimum wage? They'll say, get out of here. I never heard that before. And that's the most devastating form of bias in the media. Bias by omission, ladies and gentlemen. And shame on the networks. I'm not surprised, but further shame on the Republicans for not making this a huge, huge, huge issue. Now, maybe they talked about it. I can't follow everything, but I follow most things pretty well. And I would have heard it. All right, folks, Andy McCarthy, great writer, best-selling New York Times author, and fellow at the National Review Institute. And he's back. He took some time off. And Andy, welcome, sir. Thank you. Always great to see you. And let's start right away with the news of the day. Breaking news, if you will, and that is a revelation that ICE, Immigration and National and Customs Enforcement, they released 68,000 foreign nationals who had criminal convictions last year instead of pursuing deportation. This, according to newly uncovered documents, and this is what one senator said represents an enforcement crisis. Now, I can almost imagine who gave the order to do this or why this happened, but this is intolerable.
Yeah, Steve, this is actually something that's been going on really since President Obama became president, but certainly since 2010, the Homeland Security Department, which runs the immigration and the ICE people, the enforcement arm of the Immigration Service, has been trumpeting this theory of prosecutorial discretion as basically camouflage for not enforcing the immigration laws. And what they're really doing is they're legitimizing illegal immigration. In other words, it's no longer more important than the fact that you have blue eyes, that you don't have a legitimate basis to be in the United States. And they're looking at those cases like they would look at other enforcement cases. And they're basically saying, look, if they're not really, really serious felonies, no reason not to put these people back out on the street. And in some cases, I think they're doing it even with serious felonies.
It's outrageous. And a total of 193,000 criminal aliens were encountered last year, but only 125,000 were targeted. And, the repeated claims that when weighing whether to pursue deportation, they're prioritizing cases where the illegal immigrant in question has been convicted of a crime. That's what the administration's been saying. But
Right.
I guess, I don't know how they're measuring this. I mean, they're taking the criminals and prioritizing the criminals.
Yeah, well, it's now not only that they want them to be convicted of a crime, it has to be a serious crime by their definition. And I think, Steve, the way that they've gotten away with this is they have inflated their number of deportations from the very beginning. So that, for example, they were caught a couple of years ago taking the numbers of thousands of people who voluntarily departed the country and taking the numbers of people who they've turned away at the border and including them in their deportation numbers so that they could run around and say they have a very aggressive deportation record. And under the radar of that story, which is really a nonsense story when you look at it, what you're finding is that they're basically not enforcing the law.
It's a terrible situation, and I don't know what the repercussions will be. But again, this is kind of a lawless administration led by a lawless president and a lawless attorney general. So I don't know what could be done. Nothing, right?
Well, what Congress could do, I think, is start to cut off money from Obama administration elements, including Homeland Security. I mean, for example, if they're not going to enforce the immigration laws, why do they need the budget that they have? We should start slashing their budget. If the Justice Department has just become a political arm, why do they need to have a budget that's well over $20 billion? There's no point in it. So Congress should really start, if they want to just do something other than rant and rave, what they have to start doing is cutting the money off from the administration and raising the public's awareness of the lawlessness that's really become systematic.
Well, with this Republican leadership, they'll be so afraid that the Democrats and the media will spin it that they cut Homeland Security and that they won't be able to explain it adequately, and I'm sure they won't be able to, the way you just did.
No, you're exactly right. What their strategy is let's not say or do anything till the election because that could hurt our chances. And then if they win the election, they'll say, see, saying and doing nothing is a good strategy. Done with that.
I laugh, but it's so sad. It's so true, and it's so sad. All right, Andy, let's move on to a great piece that you wrote the other day, which talked about the conviction of Osama bin Laden's son-in-law in federal court in New York City, and how the great Eric Holder has politicized that terrorism conviction, in your view.
Yeah, Steve, he makes it very difficult to root for the government. He really does. I mean, look, we have our policy differences with the administration, and you and I were there, with thousands of other New Yorkers protesting against the idea of bringing Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and the 9/11 plotters in for a civilian trial in Manhattan.
By the way, I just got to say, I watched that recently. And my son, I don't know what he was then, 10 years old, 9 years old, 8 years old, and he had this little plastic fire hat on stage. So everywhere I could find him on stage, I stopped it and I just stared at it for a while because it's like a completely different kid. That's just a dad being a dad. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, but your son's measuring how much your son has grown in that time is possibly a measuring stick for how much the Obama administration strategy has changed in that time, because what they were doing back then, at least, was being upfront about the fact that they wanted to move all these cases into the civilian justice system. Now what they're doing is quietly whisking people into the country before opposition can be built, having the cases take place in civilian court, and then arguing from the outcome of the case that this proves that civilian prosecution is the way to go. Now, the last time they did this, the guy got acquitted on 284 out of 285 counts, so that didn't go altogether that well for them, although they continue to point out that it's really a win because the one count the guy got convicted on, he got a life sentence. In this instance, Osama bin Laden's son-in-law, Abu Ghait, Suleiman Abu Ghait, was charged with 3 counts and was very appropriately convicted of all 3. Holder came out then, of course, and instead of just celebrating the fact that we had convicted a terrorist, which we should all take some comfort in, he turned it into a big to-do about how this proves that the system works. And the problem is that the complaint that those of us who've opposed this have made has never been about whether prosecutors win terrorism cases. In fact, I'm probably proof positive that can happen.
Because you helped prosecute and put away the blind sheik.
Right, and we've been doing these cases for 20 years now. The issue has never been whether you can give them due process and convict them once you get them into court. The issue is whether all the attendant problems to doing these civilian prosecutions are worth the national security price that we pay for them, that it's warranted to continue them. And I think Holder's just wrong on that.
Well, I mean, and the future holds, more of the same, right? Like you say, they've started this process of bringing these people in and then, trying to justify it during or after the fact.
Yeah, and Steve, again, I hate to be a broken record on this, but these are all issues that should have been big issues in the 2012 presidential election. They were issues that the Republicans basically have about a 70 to 30 side on in terms of how the country feels about them. And they decided to narrowly try to make the election about the economy. And all these national security problems are now, as President Obama's friend Jeremiah Wright says, coming home to roost. And, again, we're in a place where we should have had a much better debate about these, and they should have been important election issues, and they simply weren't.
Let me ask you one final question here. How did it strike you? What was your reaction when President Obama stood up and when asked, when made the statement that Russia is not a global power, they're a regional power, blah, 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 and they're not that big a threat, and I'm much more concerned about a nuclear bomb going off in Manhattan. It was just a little too specific for me. And, he said it, he was talking defensively. And because he had been challenged with the question. We only have a minute left. And to me, I just worried that he didn't make a Freudian slip about what he's really worried about for maybe for good reason.
No, I think, Steve, that he talks thoughtlessly. I mean, he just really doesn't care that much about national security issues. He's really here to remake the domestic United States. He seems to act at times as if having to deal with foreign policy and national security is an enormous waste of his time because he wants to be doing other things. And he shoots from the hip when these questions come up. And sometimes the things he says just makes you scratch your head. I mean, if that's what the president's worried about, I think he ought to find a better way to articulate it, and somebody ought to tell him a few things about Russia.
Absolutely, and we should point out his bracket is all gone because Michigan State lost, which was a no-brainer from the beginning if you were watching him pick his brackets. Hey, Andy, great to talk to you, sir. Thank you as always.
Take care, Steve.
Take care. The great Andy McCarthy, a policy fellow at the National Review Institute, great best-selling author. We're coming back. Panel, Steve Malzberg Show, Newsmax Television.